Hey there friends, welcome back to another Legally Armed America video. I'm of course Paul Glasgow. Guys, if you don't mind, before the video gets started, please check to make sure you are still subscribed. YouTube's not a big fan of mine, and I will lose subscribers of people who want to remain subscribed to this channel, and they somehow or another, whenever they are resubscribed, the bell for notifications somehow gets unrung. So please make sure you're still subscribed. Please promote the channel if you don't mind. Tell your friends, family members, all those folks about it. We've got roughly 20-something days until Donald Trump is brought back into the White House, right? And we see people on the left who are kind of getting over their election flu, if you will. The side effects of the election are starting to wear off a little bit, and now they're starting to get defiant. You're hearing the likes of Jamie Raskin and some other publications out there talking about how Democrats need to step in and get in the way of Donald Trump assuming office again. But I fear there are bigger issues out there that are likely going to be thrown at us that don't seem so devious to try to disrupt or prevent Donald Trump from taking office. First, guys, go check out my friends over at Gideon Optics. These guys make some incredible optics. They have the brand new Granite MOS competition red dot sight that's out right now. You can get this thing for $249, regularly $319. It's got the largest MOA reticle inside the largest lens that they have available, engineered from feedback received from all the competitive shooters over the years that they've spoken to. This thing is tough, aircraft grade aluminum construction. And the battery change is extremely quick. This thing is nice. It's something that you probably want to use. Don't be fooled by the competition name on it, because this is for everybody. It's just that it's going to give really good response if you're in competition as well. So check them out. Gideon Optics. Use my code FTATF, again FTATF, and receive a nice little discount. So you're probably asking, what do I think is going to be the big thing that disrupts Donald Trump from taking office, or at least the attempt to disrupt that? Honestly, guys, H5N1. Have you heard about it? More affectionately known as the bird flu. If you're paying attention to the media, you are noticing a lot of people lately starting to panic a little bit, kind of a low-key panic, but still a panic nevertheless. Like the Hill here, bird flu virus in Louisiana patient likely mutated to be more transmissible, CDC says. And then California has already declared a state of emergency in response to the bird flu, quote, outbreak. That really should be in quotes, because there is no United States or American outbreak of the bird flu yet. But they still move on with it. If you Google bird flu, you're going to find several pages that are starting to gin up a little bit of concern about H5N1 or the bird flu. You can see here, experts worry bird flu spread is reaching boiling point. As bird flu concerns increase, don't forget about normalcy bias. That's an interesting one. Concerning bird flu virus mutations found in severely ill patient. How America lost control of the bird flu and raised the risk of another pandemic. That's from 2 days ago. How have we lost control of the bird flu? That's a great headline right there. It's almost looking into the future. Dr. Mark Siegel on bird flu. California worries me due to spread of disease in cattle. Genetic sequences of highly pathogenic avian influenza, that's the H5N1. Bird flu virus likely mutated within a Louisiana patient. We have our head in the sand, health expert warns. So for those of you who maybe wisely have ignored all of this rhetoric about bird flu, I went to the CDC's own website to get you a little bit more information about this. I want you to understand a little bit about what we're talking about, so nobody goes into full-blown panic mode like the media and the politicians are attempting to do. If you look down here on that same page, look down at current situation. These are numbers based on right now. Look down at that fifth bullet, person-to-person spread. None. So right now, the spread is essentially coming from, according to the news and quote-unquote experts on the topic, either birds, chickens, cows, or pigs. Now, this is a chart that the CDC has on H5N1, again, the bird flu. And if you look at the arrows, boy, this can be confusing for somebody just glancing at it, but notice the direction of the arrows. If you'll see the human over here, it's showing poultry and cows. Well, honestly, I mean, we know that pigs can actually give it to humans as well through spreading that. In fact, they have said some people they think have gotten it through wild birds. They don't have an arrow to that, which is kind of unusual. They show the wild birds to the poultry, but some people have said that the wild birds have given it to some of the people in the West who have contracted this. But I don't know. This is the CDC's own slide here. Like with anything else with the CDC, after COVID, what can you really trust from them? I imagine there's probably a little bit of truth to this chart, but I certainly would not stake my life on it because these people have lied to us since 2020 for sure, but likely well before that. And of course, here is a chart where supposedly confirmed influenza cases have been spread to, and you'll see Texas and Louisiana down south where I'm at. And further up there, you're going to see in the central part of the country. And then as far over as, look at that, we've even got some Oregon people with the case, 1 to 5 cases in that. So it looks like Colorado, I mean, there's 6 to 10 cases there. Again, this is definitely not enough for a panic of a, quote, outbreak for sure. So why am I bringing all this up? Well, obviously the media, as of this morning, you saw the Google pages that I showed you. The media is starting to gin this up a little bit. And this is what I think is the real problem. I believe that they want to start all of this again to regain some control. And nothing would please them more than to not only get some additional control so that you can't disrupt it. In other words, create a pandemic, if you will, because that's their term that they love. And by the way, side note, that's why they keep trying to use that with, quote, gun violence too, and calling that a pandemic, because they're writing rules in Congress that allows them, once something is determined to be a pandemic, they get different authority to do things to the American public, using that authority based on it being a pandemic. That's why you're seeing people, it's not a mistake that they're calling, quote, gun violence a pandemic. Again, that was a quick side note that I wanted you to understand. This is very important, the wording that we're using in this. But what better way to disrupt Donald Trump's inauguration and his entry into office, especially with a lot of the things that he intends to supposedly undo or fix or change the moment he gets in there, is to have him walk into office right in the middle of a new pandemic and something to where they can say, well, you can't really disrupt things right now because, I mean, we're right in the middle of a new pandemic. We're trying to figure things out, especially with the likes of all these agencies who are receiving federal funding who lied to us, like NIH, WHO, WHO, CDC, all those people like that are receiving millions and millions of dollars, likely billions of dollars from the federal government that might get pulled back on. Well, surely you can't do that right in the middle of a pandemic, right? What better way to protect your funding from the United States than to create another reason to panic about it so people will guilt you into not pulling that funding? But we're starting to see it get ramped up even more than just the likes of Google. Today being Sunday, we saw on the Sunday morning shows some of the more likely people, one of which we haven't heard from in a while and a couple that we have. Remember Dr. Birx? This is the lady with all the scarves that was Dr. Fauci's right-hand man during the beginning of all the COVID stuff. Well, she's back at it again. This time, same scarves, but a little bit different hairdo and some Botox. Check this out.
It sounds like from what you're laying out, you don't think this country has learned from the COVID pandemic. And there's not a sense of urgency right now.
Our agencies are making the same mistakes they made with COVID. The number 2 principle of pandemic is detect. And the only way to detect for viruses is to test. You cannot see a virus through symptoms. You miss so many cases. Yet we're still talking about flu-like illness.
So it is flu-like illness, by the way. I'll show you the symptoms here in a minute. But Birx now is pushing a case for a mandatory testing. This was this morning, by the way. This is not an old clip. This is from earlier this morning on the Sunday morning shows. So now she's pushing for some mandatory testing. What does that mean? It means money. Likely you're going to be able to trace this back to her. Somehow she is going to benefit, whether it's another one of these miraculous patents that they've developed for testing that goes back to her. Maybe she's a lobbyist now. I don't know what the tie back to her is, but there's no reason for her to be on TV talking about mandatory testing for a flu virus, which is essentially what it is, H5N1. There's no other reason for her to do that unless there's something monetary. And she's trying to gin up the fears of the past by saying, we didn't learn anything about COVID, we're doing it all over again, so people will start to freak out and start to panic. This was the beginning, really, that I've seen on the television networks of starting to push this fear. Again, I've only seen it online. Now it's starting to, let's be honest and use some of their terms, it's starting to mutate. It's transmissible now. The rhetoric is from the internet, now it's getting onto television. So she has started it, but it's not just her. Here's some video of Dr. Leanna Wen, also one of the people who lied to us all during COVID. She was on this morning also spreading her lies.
Should be happening in the Biden administration right now that isn't going on.
Yeah, there are two main things that they should be doing in the days that they have left. The first is to get testing out there. I feel like we should have learned our lesson from COVID that just because we aren't testing, it doesn't mean that the virus isn't there. It just means that we aren't looking for it. We should be having rapid tests, home tests available to all farm workers, to their families, for the clinicians taking care of them so that we aren't waiting for public labs and CDC labs to tell us what's bird flu or not. And the second very important thing is this is not like the beginning of COVID where we were dealing with a new virus, we didn't have a vaccine. There actually is a vaccine developed already against H5N1. The Biden administration has contracted with manufacturers to make almost 5 million doses of the vaccine. However, they have not asked the FDA to authorize the vaccine. There's research done on it. They could get this authorized now and also get the vaccine out and to farm workers and to vulnerable people. I think that's the right approach because we don't know what the Trump administration is going to be doing around bird flu. If they have people coming in with anti-vaccine stances, could they hold up vaccine authorization? If they don't want to know how much bird flu is out there, could they withhold testing? I mean, that's a possibility. And I think the Biden administration in the remaining days should get testing and vaccines widely available so that at least it empowers state and local health officials and clinicians to do the right thing for their patients.
Dr. Wen, is bird flu in humans super dangerous?
Well, the World Health Organization estimates that in prior outbreaks of the bird flu, that the mortality rate is 52%. 52%. However, in this most recent outbreak, it seems that most cases have been mild, and maybe some people even have asymptomatic infection. But the question is, we don't know what happens when bird flu affects more vulnerable individuals. People infected so far in the U.S. have been mainly farm workers who are working, presumably generally healthy, as opposed to what happens when you get to children, to pregnant women, to older individuals with chronic illnesses. We don't know how deadly, how dangerous bird flu is going to be for those individuals. And again, that's one more reason why we don't want it to spread and acquire more mutations.
So this woman has a history of being wrong. Real quick, before I show you her history of being wrong, let me explain to you. Do you notice how this is the same theme as Dr. Birx? She's also pushing for the testing, but this one talks about the vaccines that they already have developed. Now, they rushed through an experimental vaccine for COVID. We don't know the origins, at least I don't personally, the origins of H5N1. I do know that they have been working on, at least through gain of function, more on that in a minute, H5N1 for a long time, like years, well before COVID. So they certainly have experience with H5N1, which really makes you wonder who made this, right? Who built this? Whose creation is this? Again, more on that in a second. But did you notice how they're trying the same lie as before? They take reasonable people like us, and they know that we usually are not going to be duped in most cases. I know a lot of people were, but in most cases, we're not going to be duped. But let's make you think that your elderly mother or father or your child might be at more risk. When in fact we knew and was proven that children were at hardly any risk whatsoever during COVID. But this woman sat right here saying that, trying to scare people just like they did before and say that we don't know what the risk is to old people or young people. Well, wait a minute. If we're making comparisons to COVID, then I'm going to make my same comparison and say that old people might be susceptible. Maybe don't pile them all in a nursing home together who have it. And we knew that COVID was not a risk to young people. So I'm going to make that jump and that same assumption too. You make your ties to COVID as you see fit. I'm going to do the same because history played out and we found out that children were not susceptible because they were so strong. and it was not a danger to them. When I say children, we're talking about people all the way up into their 20s that were forced to get a vaccine that ultimately, in some cases, took their lives, that did not need that, quote, vaccine, that experimental drug that they gave them. Another thing that she pushed on is that mortality rate. I'm going to get more on that in a minute, and there's some reasonings behind that, but she pushes this mortality rate of 50-something%, saying that, ooh, this is the way you scare people. You tell them that over half of the people who have gotten H5N1 have perished from it. That's how you scare people. Because then when they hear that there's an outbreak, or I shouldn't say an outbreak, when they hear that there's one person in the state of Louisiana and one or two in Texas who have it, then they freak out and say, oh, it's here, and half of the people are going to die. Not so fast on that one. I want to show you real quick, though, why Wing here cannot be trusted. She is a known liar, a known spreader of propaganda, and every single thing that she says should be discounted and led to believe that it's likely a lie or a paid advertisement from somebody profiting somewhere on what she's pushing. Check this out.
Are paying a price for the actions of the unvaccinated, because what we know is that the vaccinated are very safe around one another. So the two of you, all of us, if we're vaccinated, we're safe around each other. But if we're vaccinated and we're surrounded by a whole bunch of unvaccinated people, especially in areas with high coronavirus transmission, there's going to be spillover. And that's what we're seeing, that we're seeing vaccinated people also get infections. Now, they tend to not be severe infections, which points to the effectiveness of the vaccine, but it's possible that especially with the Delta variant, we could still get ill, we could pass it on to our family members. And so I think it's really important that vaccinated people stop thinking that we're fully protected. We need to start looking at the choice to remain unvaccinated the same as we look at driving while intoxicated. That you have the option to not get vaccinated if you want, but then you can't go out in public.
The honor code was never going to work, that when vaccinated and unvaccinated people are mixing, unless there is proof of vaccination, everybody should still be wearing masks. And so I actually support what the CDC is now doing, which is going back to this indoor mask requirement, because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated, that they have been walking around without masks. And in fact, that's what led to the surge that we're seeing.
So the woman is a known liar. I don't think you should trust or believe anything that she says. Quite frankly, I think that when she comes on television, you should promptly turn the TV off. Now, our little hobbit that made gazillions off of COVID, and he's apparently going to be making gazillions more off of H5N1. He's back in the picture now.
The sobering news is that that can change because the virus infects more than one species, and we know it can infect pigs. Pigs are on farms with chickens and with cows, and chickens and cows can infect with their virus a pig, and then a human virus can go into pig, and then you could get a reassortment of a virus that has some of the dangerous qualities of H5N1 and some of the capability of spreading from human to human of a human virus. So that's what public health officials are concerned about, that when you have the circulation of this virus in multiple species, including a mixing bowl species like a pig, you might get a reassortment and a mutation that could make this something we really have to be concerned about. And that's the reason why the CDC says, although currently the risk in general is low, we still have to pay close attention to the possibility that that might change.
Now, you know why he knows that a reassortment or a mutation of H5N1 is possible, right? Because they did it in gain of function. But what he's implying here, or at least stating as fact, is that birds, chickens, cows can pass this to a pig, pigs can pass this to humans, and that there can be, again, what he calls a reassortment or a mutation to where now humans can spread it to one another. I pulled up some old video from 2012. This is a conference that Dr. Fauci, or Dr. Death, however you want to describe him, was at, and was the expert, the keynote speaker of this particular conference. Notice some of the things that he's already denied before, but this is open to anybody who wants to watch it. In fact, I can post the whole video online so you can see the whole thing. This is some information that I want you to listen to the wording very closely and think about it. This man from 2012, this is a video from 2012, is talking about the exact same thing I'm discussing here, H5N1. They were working on this through gain of function 12 to 13 years ago.
NIAID, NIH, certainly CDC, only funds and conducts gain of function research on H5N1 highly pathogenic avian influenza viruses for researchers who are highly trained, skilled, experienced, and adequately regulated. This issue has not been a major concern about the investigators, certainly the ones that I just mentioned, who clearly fall into that category. That was not the concern. The concern was that the products or information that were generated by these experiments might be used by others in a way that could harm society, either carelessly, in an unregulated fashion, by inexperienced people, or even by deliberate misuse.
That's pretty scary to hear this man say those words, right? To me it is. This was 12, 13 years ago whenever they were working on this. And what, 8 years after this video, we got COVID. You notice how at the end of this, he talked about the potential misuse of this? He talks about it harming society and says whether it's careless, unregulated, inexperienced, or deliberate. Talks about the harmful nature of this towards society. This man was balls deep in gain-of-function research by his own admission in this clip that I just played for you. Now, he's not running from it. I mean, GOF is gain-of-function research. And he was the head guy at NIH at this time, right? They were conducting this gain-of-function research into H5N1. Quick side note here. Who do you think, remember when Dr. Wynn talked about pushing the new H5N1 vaccine? Fauci was working on H5N1 gain of function back then, 12, 13 years ago. Who do you think has a patent on that? I don't know yet. I've looked for it and I can't find it, but I'm still looking. But I wonder who has the patent on that vaccine.
The risk to global health of the work that we fund, the risk of not funding that research versus the risk to the global health of the information harming society.
So one of the things they were struggling with at this conference was whether or not they should be. They were questioning their own work. Should they be funding gain of function, which is essentially helping viruses and other things, and I'm oversimplifying this, by the way, but helping these things mutate to try to fight them in a lab to determine, hey, if it got out or if this happened, how would we fight this? How do we develop a vaccine for something like this? Oh, we have to create it first in order to create the vaccine to see if the vaccine works on the thing that we created. So he's literally having this internal struggle openly with everybody, talking about, is it more risky to have gain of function where we're creating and mutating these viruses, or is it more risky to not do this type of work? Here's a little more.
What we're talking about now is the gain of function research in studies that increase predominantly the transmissibility, as is the case that I'm going to get into in a moment, as well as pathogenesis and alteration of host range of the virus. Now, the reason we are here today in this room with H5N1, highly pathogenic influenza, and we're not in this room discussing so many of the other gain of function research that we do, is because naturally occurring HPAI, H5N1 viruses cause a reported almost 60% mortality in humans, which triggered a concern, understandably, clearly, that if you give a gain of function of a pathogenic virus to make it more transmissible, that's a whole different story than some of the other things we faced.
But they did make it more transmissible. In this same thing, he's talking about that 59% mortality rate, and then saying, oh, it could be really bad if we made it more transmissible. In this same conference, he admits that gain of function research and testing and experiments actually made this which was not prior to that aerosol or airborne. Now they made it aerosol, and it mutated as a result of their gain-of-function research and experimenting. Check this out.
There were studies done by two NIH, NIAID-funded investigators, Ron Fouché and Yoshi Kawaoka, in which H5N1, a strain from Indonesia and a strain from Vietnam, were altered in a gain of function, either by direct mutation or by reassortment. And by passage in ferrets, the mammal model for this virus, for humans, there was an increase in fact, a development of aerosol transmissibility in a mammal, which this particular virus did not have.
So they literally admit right there, you heard it with your own ears, the mutation or reassortment of this particular H5N1 virus using their own research, because the H5N1 was not transmissible by aerosol prior to their experiments, and now it is after their gain-of-function experiments and testing. They created this thing to be what it is now. Now, I don't want to be the guy that says that there is zero risk associated with H5N1. First of all, I'm no doctor, I'm no scientist, but I can read words and I can comprehend what those words mean. So when you lie to me, I can tell that you're lying because I understand the English language, right? Do you detect the sarcasm in my voice? I hope you do, because I know you guys out there are just as swift as I am when it comes to reading words from the English language. So I don't need somebody with paper hanging on their wall to tell me that, oh, because I went to school for it, I can determine the English language and maneuver my way around it a little bit better than you can. No, you can't. I want you guys to understand that I know that there is a certain amount of risk involved with this, just like anything else, just like the flu, the common cold. Everything has a certain amount of risk based on the patient, right? I went to the World Health Organization's own website. This is a report from December 13th, only a week or so ago of this year, right? Human infection with avian influenza. You'll notice it says going back to 2003 until November of 2024, a total of 261 cases of human infection with avian influenza, H5N1, has been reported from 5 countries within the Western Pacific region. They state that 142 of those 261 cases were fatal. That's going to be a mortality rate of 54%. But look down at the bottom of the page. This is globally. This is worldwide. Again, same time frame, January 2003 to November 2024. There were a total of 931 cases of H5N1 reported. Of those, 464 were fatal. That's a mortality rate of 49%. So folks, that is a grand total over a 20-year period of time with 931 cases. That's about 44 cases per year. Over a 21-year period of time, we have averaged 44 in a year, and 22 per year have died. That's the next pandemic, right? Now, granted, they may be a little bit more concerned now because they created the ability of H5N1 to not only pass through oral to feces, which is the way it was spread before, to now, after their gain-of-function research and testing and experimenting, now it can be passed aerosol. They created that. So maybe they are rightfully more concerned, and we will see additional cases now, since it can be more easily spread based on what they created with their own government funding and experiments to make this a more transmissible disease. Now, is it more deadly? No, according to their numbers, it's the same mortality rate the whole way through. So we've not seen an uptick in mortality. We've actually seen it come down a little bit if you're fair about the numbers. So there doesn't seem to be a worse version of H5N1, just a more transmissible version of H5N1, again, that they created themselves. Now, this was another study that I found on a pretty interesting site. The site was the Lancelot Infectious Diseases. None of this stuff is hard to find. You don't have to dig too far in order to get this. But it was mortality of H5N1 human infections might be due to H5N1 virus pneumonia and could decrease by switching receptor. What they're stating is, and I want you to see this first one that I pulled out. Here we argue that the high mortality might be due to H5N1 virus pneumonia, meaning it's settled down into the lungs. And should the H5N1 switch to the upper airway receptor, which is essentially where COVID mostly was for human infections, they hypothesize that the mortality would be lower because most infections would be restricted to the upper respiratory tract infections, and only in rare cases would it be evolving into pneumonia, dropping down into the lungs. Another thing that they state is, therefore, we hypothesize that if the H5N1 virus switched receptor preference to the human upper respiratory receptor, the virus might cause a less severe upper respiratory infection and the mortality rate would decrease because most cases would no longer be due to influenza virus pneumonia. So that may be a little bit of the reason why, based on what I've said, is that the mortality rate actually might be coming down, because as it mutates or makes its way into humans, it's very likely that it's not going to be the same. Again, we can't set COVID and H5N1 right next to each other and say they're going to be the same, even though they have many of, if in some cases, identical symptoms of this. Now, I want to be very, very clear about something that I've been looking at, and let's look at the symptoms real quick. Symptoms of H5N1, again, eye redness, that seems like the most prevalent symptom is basically pink eye. You're going to get pink eye, but the rest of the stuff is all essentially COVID. Cough, sore throat, runny or stuffy nose, muscle or body ache, headache, fatigue, fever 100 degrees. Come on, really? I mean, you're at, not even 2 degrees over 98.6, and you're telling me that, oh, that might be a symptom of H5N1. How many of us walk around with probably that much fever on a daily basis and don't even notice it? Shortness of breath, of course, that seems a little bit more severe. Diarrhea, nausea, or vomiting. I guess I'll have to monitor my trips to Taco Bell so I don't confuse that with getting H5N1. But why am I talking about these symptoms? They're pushing a mortality rate, at least Fauci did, of 59%. We've seen others of 40-something% to 52%, but 59% being the highest mortality rate that these people are talking about. That's to gin up the fear, to get you scared, to make you go, oh God, the mortality rate is through the roof. This is going to be terrible. It's going to kill off 59% of the population. Understand something. Remember that we were listening to Dr. Wynn and Dr. Birx talk about the testing? There's not mandatory testing. There's not worldwide testing for H5N1. They want there to be, but there's not now. So it's easy to say that we have a mortality rate of 59% if only the people that we know that have it are in really bad shape, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? If we're not doing a mandatory testing or a widespread testing of a particular virus because it's not that bad and it's not that harmful and there's likely people walking around with it, just like people who had COVID and felt perfectly fine. Maybe a couple of sniffles, scratchy eyes, right? A lot of people had it, didn't know they had it. A lot of people could have H5N1 and simply not know it because the symptoms are so mild. So they only know of people who died because they knew they had H5N1 because their symptoms were so bad that they needed clinical help or doctor help, right? In other words, if you're walking around with H5N1 and there's not a mandatory testing and you're not so bad you need to go to a doctor, who knows that you have it? So the mortality rate could be 5%, not 59%. It could be 1%. It could be less than 1%. Because if we did mandatory testing, we might find that thousands and maybe millions of people have it, and only 22 a year so far are dying from this. And that's, again, if they're dying from it. How many of these people that passed away as a result of, quote, H5N1 were 500 pounds overweight or had other issues, diabetes or whatever? So they're pushing the mortality rate right now to scare people into an outcry for, first of all, mandatory testing, but certainly they're wanting to push this H5N1 vaccine that they claim is already developed. Again, follow the money. I wonder who's tied to that. But they're wanting to make this push really soon. Here we are a couple of days away from January 1st. The inauguration where Trump is going to take power is January 20th. So we're only 20-something days away, and they're ramping up the rhetoric for H5N1 to try to, and you heard the lady, the guy asked the lady, Wynn, what are things that Biden should do before Trump takes over, knowing that there's only 20-something days. And her response is push for testing and push for a vaccine for H5N1. Look for more of this to get ramped up. Look for more of the mask talk to start. California, again, is already declaring a state of emergency as a result of this, and it's not an emergency. So you're going to see a quick ramp up, not a short one. Remember how fast COVID, we heard a little bit about it, and then boom, 2 weeks later, everything was shut down? That's likely what we could see. I encourage everybody to do your own research. Ignore anything you see on television. Please ignore everything you see on television, right? Because they're lying to you. And you have to pretty much handpick what you're looking at online. The CDC right now is at least being partially honest, even though they're an organization known for lying. But they're being partially honest. I feel like once you see the CDC switch and start panicking about this, because they're not right now, once you see them switch, everybody is going to switch. The entire medical community is likely going to do the same thing they did last night and repeat all the lies and whip people up into a fervor. And the next thing you know, here we go again with another shutdown. I don't think America's going to let that happen this time. I think a lot of people got duped last time. A lot of people didn't. I mean, many of us did not even consider, let alone get the vaccine. Many of us didn't, and many of you didn't. I know that for a fact. But we didn't know what to expect. You know, when that thing came out and hit, everybody was looking around. First thing you thought of is your parents or your grandparents or your children. I don't think they're going to fall for it this time. I hope they don't.
I don't understand the point that you're making.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.
It's over.